The Conjuring franchise follows dramatised retellings of numerous real-life hauntings that were investigated by the Warrens, a paranormal ghost-hunting, demon-slaying couple, who saved families from hauntings and possessions to even being witnesses in a real-life murder trial claiming the killings were an act of demonic possession. But with allegations of being scam artists, taking advantage of the mentally ill, and even being accused of using the Conjuring films to sanitize their own history and hide their secrets. Hello and welcome to Bloody Good. My name is Montgomery and today we're looking at the Conjuring franchise. We're going to be taking each film and comparing them to the real life accounts of what really happened. We're going to be grading each film on how accurate it is to these real life stories, and we'll be trying to find out what is fact and what's just Hollywood fiction. The first Conjuring film follows Roger and Carolyn Perron, who move into an old farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island with their 5 daughters. Almost immediately, strange things begin to happen. Clocks stop at exactly 3:07 AM, doors slam shut on their own, and the family dog refuses to enter the house, and is later found dead under mysterious circumstances. The manifestations become increasingly violent, with Carolyn beginning to find unexpected bruises, and one of the daughters even attacked by this unseen force. Desperate, the Perrons contact Ed and Lorrain Warren, who agree to investigate. The Warrens quickly identify a demonic presence tied to the house and its dark history, finding it belonged to an accused witch who murdered her child in the name of Satan before killing herself. Lorrain Warren begins to experience visions of this demonic entity. Carolyn becomes fully possessed and she attempts to kill her 2 youngest daughters. The Warrens rush back, with Ed performing an emergency exorcism. Lorraine reaches her emotionally, reminding her of memories of her daughter, which gives Carolyn the strength to resist the demon. The Warrens leave the property and the family is forever grateful. But that's not completely accurate. Now, the parents really did move into a haunted home, a home they were even warned about before moving in. However, the ghostly experiences they had were friendly at first. The hauntings began simply with a broom that would disappear and reappear all around the house, even though nobody had touched it. Along with that, piles of dust and dirt would miraculously appear all around the house. This led the family to nickname the ghost the Sweeping Ghost. However, these hauntings would soon take a devilish turn. Each morning, the family would wake to the smell of rotting flesh. Beds would be tossed asunder with occupants still inside, and the daughters would be dragged around by their hair by an invisible entity, and this was covered somewhat accurately in the film. However, the father, Roger, reportedly never witnessed a single haunting that occurred. In an effort to understand what was happening in the house, it was Carolyn, not the Warrens, who discovered the evil origins of the house belonging to an accused witch who killed her own son in the name of Satan. However, this is widely disputed due to a lack of birth records and accurate censuses done at the time. Now, the parents did have a dog that unfortunately died. However, this happened long before they moved into the home, and it wasn't under mysterious circumstances by a ghost or demon. The dog simply ran into traffic. And the family even lived with the hauntings after moving into the home for 3 years until they contacted the Warrens. When the Warrens arrived at the home, Carolyn told them all about the research she had done on the home. The Warrens ran with it, convincing her that the random bruises she had experienced were caused by a spirit using a sewing or knitting needle, depending on sources. Now, Carolyn confided in the Warrens and asked them to keep their situation quiet. And the Warrens didn't do this. The Warrens toured the country, giving speeches about the hauntings happening in this home. They went into such excruciating detail that people were able to track down the home, leading them to be accosted by looky-loos, ghost hunters, and just weirdos. Now, despite the betrayal, Carolyn was desperate for these hauntings to end and agreed for the Warrens to perform a seance. The Warrens arrived with an entourage, including a medium, a parapsychologist from Duke University, and a priest. Now, a key detail to note here was that Roger was not informed that the Warrens would be coming over once more. So you can imagine his anger when these people who leaked the location of his home showed up on his doorstep once again. Annoyed, he still let them into the home to perform a seance, but refused to be involved. What happened next is heavily contested, but Andrea, the daughter of the Perrons, claimed to have witnessed the seance in secret, telling USA Today in 2013. My mother began to speak a language not of this world in a voice not of her own. Her chair levitated and she was thrown across the room. Now, this is when Roger ran across the room to aid his wife, and it was Ed who held him back, trying to stop him from intervening. Roger, rightfully so, turned around and punched Ed straight in the face. Fair enough, man, fair enough. Roger then ordered the Warrens and their company to leave the home, referring to the Warrens later as a pair of two-bit charlatans. Now, whilst Roger still did not believe in the hauntings happening in his home, Andrea was convinced that the Warrens had actually made the situation worse, with the hauntings becoming more violent after this incident. Even with the consistent hauntings, the family continued to live in the home for 7 more years, putting up with the paranormal activity because they simply couldn't afford to move. They eventually sold the house in 1980 to a new family who never reported a single paranormal incident. In summary, the film cherry-picks the real-life accounts and mixes it with obscure truths and straight-up lies done for entertainment value. Now, this is not surprising, considering Lorraine Warren was actually an advisor on the film, and when asked about her situation in this house, she had this to say. The things that went on there were just so incredibly frightening. It still haunts me to this day. However, when you compare this quote to a quote from Andrea, the youngest daughter of the family, it muddies the image a little bit. Andrea had this to say: even though The Conjuring is an excellent film for what it is, it's about 95% fiction and 5% hard truth. Now, with that quote in mind, we're going to be giving this film a grade of C for its accuracy, as it did stick fairly well to the real-life accounts of situations that happened in this home. The second film follows the Hodgson family and the haunting of their home and the possession of their daughter. The film opens with the Warrens investigating the Amityville haunting, where Lorraine first encounters the nun. The film takes us to London, where we are introduced to the Hodgson family, who begin to experience strange disturbances in their modest home. Single mother, Peggy Hodgson, is at a loss when her daughter Janet appears to become the centre of intense paranormal activity, including sleepwalking, levitating, speaking in tongues, and being possessed by an entity claimed to be Bill Wilkins, the spirit of the previous tenant. The public and media become involved, and soon the haunting is national news, which many suspect is a hoax by the children. The escalation of the events suggests otherwise. The Catholic Church asks Warrens to visit Enfield and evaluate whether the events are genuine. The Church don't want to publicly associate with the case unless the Warrens find proof. Once in England, they encounter the increasingly aggressive haunting and try to make sense of multiple spiritual presences. At one point, Janet appears to be faking the hauntings, caught on video bending spoons and wrecking the kitchen. Eventually, using her psychic abilities and memories from the Amityville seance, Lorraine deciphers the demon nun's name, Valak. With the name, she can challenge and exorcise the entity. As the demonic activity escalates, Janet is possessed and held at the brink of death. Lorraine is able to banish the demon away, speaking its true name, saving the family and leaving them forever grateful. But that's quite a stretch. Now, in real life, the hauntings began with beds moving, mysterious noises, and a chest of drawers moving on its own, witnessed by Peggy, the mother herself. There was a strange knocking sound coming from the walls, which frightened the family so much they all slept in the same room with the light on. A neighbour also claimed to hear this knocking when he was asked to investigate the home by the family. Now, there is a very dramatic scene in the movie where there is a room covered with crosses, and the demonic entity switches them all upside down in unison. And this absolutely did not happen. An iconic image from this case is that of Janet levitating above her bed. Her positioning in a series of photos has led most people to believe she was simply jumping from her bed. And yeah, you can't really blame them looking at the photos, especially the series of photos. However, the film does directly address this. Now, most interesting of all, there really was a real-life policewoman who witnessed a chair levitating. She went so far to sign a sworn affidavit that she'd really witnessed this. However, the police did nothing, as they decided there were actually no laws broken, making this not a police issue. Janet's supposed possession to Bill Wilkins seems to be inspired by the audio tapes of the real Janet Hodgson, when she spoke in a strange voice and said, "Just before I died, I went blind, and then I had a hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died, in the chair in the corner downstairs." And this story was apparently confirmed by Bill Wilkins' son. According to Janet, the voices had mostly been growls and barks until the investigator, Murray Grossman, told them, "All we need now is the voice to talk." And following the suggestion, the voices began to speak through Janet. 2 experts from the Society for Psychical Research caught the children bending spoons themselves. Now, one of the biggest creative liberties taken by the film was the extent the Warrens were involved. Guy Playfair, one of the original paranormal investigators on the case, came forward prior to the film's release, claiming the Warrens turned up uninvited and only stayed for a single day. Ed Warren apparently told Playfair he could make a lot of money off this case. Peggy actually believed that it wasn't the Warrens that solved the spiritual dispute in her home, but in fact a local priest. However, even after this, she still heard noises, but these eventually died down. In the 1980s, Janet gave interviews where she said she had faked things to see if investigators would catch her, which they always did. In an article published a year before the film was released, Janet claimed roughly 2% of the paranormal activities in their home had been faked. Now, I'm not here whether to say this ghost hunting was real or not. I'll leave that for you to decide. However, we are grading these films based on how they are adapted from this source material and real life accounts to the film. And this film is quite atrocious with how much it shows the Warrens being involved in the film, when realistically they were there for less than a day and didn't even get let in the home. So for that reason, we're giving this film an accuracy rating of D. In the third film, the movie opens with an intense exorcism of 8-year-old David Glatzel in 1981, during which Ed and Lorraine witness disturbing supernatural activities as the ritual intensifies. Ed suffers a heart attack while witnessing something unprecedented. The demon seemingly leaves David's body and enters Arn Johnson, the boyfriend of David's sister, Debbie. Arn begins to exhibit erratic behaviour, and he murders his landlord, Bruno Sauls, in what appears to be a trance-like state. He claims to have no memories of the killing and insists that the killings were a result of demonic possession. We learn that a woman named Isla is responsible for planting a satanic curse tied to an altar. The curse was placed under the Glatzels' home and is what invited the demonic entity. Lorraine uses her clairvoyant powers to connect the dots, discovering that similar murders and suicides occurred elsewhere, each linked by a cursed totem. The Warrens' investigation lead them to a former priest, Father Katzner, who explains that Isla is his estranged daughter and is now a practitioner of the occult. As the Warrens close in on Isla, Ed suffers worsening health problems due to his earlier heart attack. Still, he presses forward. While investigating the tunnel alone, Lorraine almost becomes a victim of Isla, who is trying to complete a ritual that requires 3 deaths. They realise Arn is set to be the final death. In the final act, Ed and Lorraine discover the underground tunnel where Isla has her occult altar. Ed, under possession, almost murders Lorraine but snaps out of it. When reminded of their love, an emotional callback to their strong spiritual bond throughout the series, Ed manages to destroy Isla's altar with a sledgehammer, breaking the curse and severing the demon's grip on Arn. The demonic entity turns on Isla instead, killing her violently for her failure to complete the ritual. Arn is no longer possessed. In the aftermath, Arn is convicted of manslaughter instead of murder, receiving a reduced sentence. Now, this one's a bit more interesting, as there aren't too many creative liberties taken with certain aspects of the film, but there's a hell of a lot taken with others. The trial of Arn Johnson was extremely high profile in real life, but the film doesn't spend much time in the courtroom at all, instead focusing on the Warrens and their search for clues to help Arn, and ultimately the final showdown where the Warrens break the curse on. David's encounter with a demonic hand ripping out the waterbed is completely fictionalized for the film. After moving into the rental property, David reportedly had a traumatic event happen to him in one of the bedrooms, with a burn mark going through the mattress and onto the floorboards. However, there was no waterbed and no occult witch totem. David claimed to be possessed by 42 demons. He also claimed to see a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features and jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns and hoofs, and would wake up with unexplained bruises and scratches. The family sought help from the church and a priest blessed the home, but David only grew worse. Now this is where it gets interesting. The family did contact the Warrens, and the Warrens did perform 4 separate exorcisms with priests in tow. And Arn reportedly really did invite the demon to come inside of him instead of possessing the child. After this, David seemingly returned to normal, but Arn found himself in a trance and claimed to see the same men David did, as well as getting into trouble with the police. The murder sequence in the film is very much fabricated, because the real Arn Johnson claimed he blacked out and had no memory of the event. However, there were also witnesses to the murder that are just not included in the film. I think it's worth mentioning this is one of the few films in the franchise where they changed a real person's name, the landlord in fact, and this is probably done for the fact that they didn't want to sully the name of a real-life murder victim in something made for entertainment purposes. In real life, the day after the murder, Lorraine told police that Johnson was innocent, as he was possessed at the time of the murder. When the Warrens tried to use a defense that Arne was possessed during the time of the murders, the judge quickly dismissed it, which, yeah, fair enough. He cited that it would be impossible to prove. The defense instead decided to go with the idea that Arne simply killed his landlord in self-defense. Using the argument that he killed his landlord in self-defense, he was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to serve 10 to 20 years in prison. He served 5 and was released for good behaviour, leaving prison and marrying Debbie. One thing the film does get right is Ed's heart attack. In fact, Ed suffered from multiple heart attacks, one of which put him in a wheelchair for months. However, none of these heart attacks happened when he was on a case, according to our research. Now, unsurprisingly, the whole satanic tunnels things that neatly ties into Annabelle, completely fictionalized and really only made to pull the cinematic universes of these film franchises together. Overall, there's a lot of truth to this film when it comes to the court case and the Warrens' involvement. However, the issues with the witches, underground satanic tunnels, and psychic visions is completely fabricated for the film, leaving us to give this an overall accuracy rating of E. The fourth and final film of the franchise so far follows the Smurl family and the hauntings that happen in their home. The film opens with the Warrens investigating a mirror in a curiosity shop. A demonic presence is attempting to manifest through the mirror. When Lorraine investigates the mirror, she is sent into labour, forcing Ed to take her to hospital to give birth, abandoning the mirror. And when Lorraine later gives birth to her daughter Judy, she is a stillborn. Thankfully, the Warrens are able to bring her back to life. We pick up with the Warrens, who are now retired and only giving lectures instead of being involved in cases. Jack and Janet Smurl live with their 4 daughters, Dawn, Heather, Karen and Sharon, and Jack's parents. To celebrate Heather's birthday, Jack buys her the very same mirror the Warrens encountered all those years ago. Things begin to get strange in the Smurl family household. The daughter hears disembodied voices, sees shadowy entities move from corner to corner, and faces inexplicable paranormal phenomenon that threatens their safety. Dawn and Heather begin to notice that all the activity seems to stem from the mirror, so they attempt to throw it away. However, Dawn later begins to cough up shards of glass and vomits blood. The family are terrified by these events and decide to approach the press and reveal the hauntings that have taken over their lives. The Warrens are asked by Father Gordon to assist Smurls, but they decline. Judy, the daughter of the Warrens, decides to investigate the hauntings of the Smurls by herself, leading her parents to join her out of fear for her safety. The spirit within the mirror aggressively invades the Smurls' household, disturbingly attempting to possess Judy. After attempting to move the mirror into Ed's car, a tense emotional confrontation unfolds as Lorraine utilizes her psychic abilities, joining Judy in a fierce telepathic battle against the demon trying to take over the family. The mirror shatters. Afterwards, the Smurls, though visibly shaken and bruised, find solace in their unity and continue to reside in the house for 3 more years. After securing the remnant of the mirror in their occult museum, Ed and Lorraine Warren share a quiet exchange. Was that what really happened? Well, let's see. In 1973, the Smurls moved into their new home following a recent flood which forced them to move. However, unlike the movie, the alleged hauntings were far more gradual. The hauntings started with doors slamming on their own, toilets flushing by themselves, but they really started when a ceiling light fell during dinner, leaving a gash on one of their daughters' heads in 1985. After this, the hauntings began to escalate quickly, with the smell of foul odours coming from the house, beds shaking with people still inside them, the family dog being thrown against a wall by a demonic spirit, and even one of their daughters being pushed down the stairs. The entity went as far to assault several members of this family. The family's first choice was to contact the local church, who sent priests around to conduct 2 exorcisms of the house, and this did not work, forcing the family to contact the press in search for help from anyone. Unsurprisingly, this did catch the attention of the Warrens, who immediately agreed the house was haunted, but not by 1 ghost, by 3 ghosts and a demon to boot. On his first night in the house, Ed Warren claimed that furniture began to jump around when he tried to expel the demon with holy water, holy oil, and a crucifix. Now, were the Warrens able to expel these 3 ghosts and a demon with the help of their daughter? No, of course not. What the Warrens really did was work with the family and a local news reporter to make a book based on the hauntings that happen in this home, which would be later turned into a TV movie, giving them a nice bit of profit there. The demon and free ghosts were actually banished by Reverend Joseph Adonisio, who led the family in intense prayer, which banished the ghosts away. However, the mother claimed she would still hear occasional knocking and even seeing shadows out of the corner of her eye. However, it wasn't until 1987 when they finally sold the house and moved, and the new occupants never reported a single paranormal incident. Overall, this film leaves a lot to be desired in its accuracy, and in my opinion is particularly egregious with the way it seems intent on cementing the Warrens' legacy as supernatural saviours, when, putting it the nicest way I can, the Warrens were much closer to public speakers and booksellers. The entire subplot with the mirror just did not exist and didn't happen. And for that reason, we'll be giving this film an accuracy rating of an E. In conclusion, I am a fan of the Conjuring films. I don't want it to get twisted. I really enjoy these films, and that is thanks in no small part to the performances of Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, who deliver stellar performances, who are the ones who make me like the Warrens, not the real-life Warrens. With that in mind, they are playing aggressively fictionalized versions of the Warrens. The Warrens in reality were people who took advantage of vulnerable people, would show up on doorsteps unannounced and be turned away, or would rile up people so badly they would be assaulted. The biggest gripe with these films is not the fictionalized ghosts, it is the way they represent the Warrens' relationships with the families they help. They show them having these loving relationships, caring, taking the time to understand them, and this just isn't true. Now, it's very hard to prove what really happened in real life, and we can only go by the first-hand accounts of the people involved. However, using that information and comparing it to the films, we can say that the Conjuring franchise is in fact fiction. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.